The air at Forward Operating Base Dagger hung thick and stagnant. A soupy mix of diesel fumes, churned dust, and the cloying humidity of the Zarian highlands. It was the kind of air that clung to the back of your throat, a constant reminder of how far from home you were. For the men of Ares' platoon, SEAL Team 4, it was just another Tuesday. They moved with the lazy, predatory grace of men who owned their environment, their gear worn and salted with the grit of a dozen unnamed conflicts. Today, however, their practiced ease was frayed at the edges. General Alistair Thorne was leaving. Thorne was a monolith, a throwback to a harder era. He'd come up through the ranks when the rules were suggestions and victory was the only metric that mattered. He understood them, the feral calculus of their profession. His departure felt like a foundation stone being pulled from under them. The rumor mill, grinding faster than the generators powering the TOC, churned out a replacement profile that sounded like a joke. A logistics specialist, a paper pusher, someone with a doctorate in supply chain management. A politician in uniform. Lieutenant Commander Reaper Jensen leaned against the scarred concrete of a T-wall. His arms crossed over a chest as broad as a battering ram. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the perimeter. Heard the new CO is a she, Petty Officer Ox Kowalski grunted, cleaning a stubborn patch of carbon from his rifle's bolt carrier group. The words hung in the air, weighted with implication. Probably some diversity hire. Another SEAL, Slinger Diaz, muttered from his perch on a stack of ammo cans. Gonna come in here and tell us to be more mindful of our operational footprint. A round of cynical chuckles followed. They'd seen it before. Officers fresh from staff colleges, their heads filled with theories and flowcharts, trying to apply boardroom logic to the chaotic blood and guts reality of their world. They rarely lasted. Jensen didn't smile. He just kept watching the flight line, where a C-130 was taxiing after landing, its props churning the thick air into a vortex of dust. His gaze drifted past the tarmac, toward the chain-link fence separating the operational area from the administrative annex. A figure stood there, alone, watching them. It was a woman. She wore standard-issue OCPs, but they were clean, perfectly pressed, without the faded, lived-in look of their own uniforms. Her build was slight, not frail but economical. Her hair, pulled back in a severe regulation bun, was a mix of dark brown and striking silver, catching the harsh afternoon sun. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture one of observation, not command. She looked like a civilian contractor, or maybe an analyst from Langley who'd hitched a ride. "Who's the Deadweight?" Slinger asked, nodding in her direction. "Must be part of the new command staff," Ox offered, squinting. "Looks like she could get lost on her way to the mess hall." Jensen's lip curled in a faint sneer. He saw everything they did, the lack of overt muscle, the clean uniform, the placid expression. He saw a bureaucrat, a liability. She didn't belong here, in the razor-wire world of men who killed for a living. Her presence felt like an intrusion, a symbol of the sanitized, politically correct military that was slowly strangling the warrior ethos he lived by. He watched as she turned and walked away, her stride measured and even, disappearing behind a prefabricated building. She didn't look back. Jensen dismissed her from his mind. She was irrelevant, another piece of the bureaucratic baggage that came with a change of command. He had real problems to worry about. The Zarian Highlands were a powder keg, and his team was the only thing stopping it from blowing sky-high. He didn't have time for deadweight. The next morning, the official handover ceremony took place in the cavernous, air-conditioned briefing room of the Tactical Operations Center. The entire command staff of FOB Dagger was present, along with Ares' platoon, standing stiffly at the back. General Thorne, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles, gave a short, gruff speech that was more a series of acknowledgments than a farewell. He shook a few hands, his grip like a vice, and then turned to the base commander, Colonel Maddox. "Colonel, introduce my replacement," Thorne rumbled, his voice like gravel pouring into a steel drum. Colonel Maddox, a man who always seemed perpetually stressed, stepped up to the podium. "Thank you, General. It is my honor to introduce the new commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Highlands, Brigadier General Eva Rostova. He gestured to the side. The woman from the fence line stepped forward. A wave of disbelief, thick and suffocating, rolled through the room. Ares' platoon exchanged glances that ranged from shock to outright hostility. This was her? The Deadweight? The quiet observer from yesterday was their new commanding general. She wore a freshly pressed dress uniform now, the single star on her collar gleaming under the fluorescent lights. It didn't make her look any more imposing. If anything, it made her look smaller, like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. Rostova walked to the podium. She didn't have Thorne's towering presence or his booming voice. She was of average height, her face etched with fine lines around the eyes and mouth that suggested not age, but intensity. Her eyes were a pale, indeterminate color, and they swept over the room with an unnerving stillness, missing nothing. "Thank you, Colonel," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a professional, but to the SEALs it sounded sterile, academic. "General Thorne, your service here has set a standard I will endeavor to uphold. To the men and women of this task force, I have one simple expectation: excellence. We have a difficult mission in a complex environment. We will succeed by being smarter, faster, and more lethal than our enemies." Dismissed. The speech was brutally efficient. No platitudes, no attempts to win them over. As the room began to empty, Colonel Maddox gestured for Ares' platoon to remain. Jensen felt a knot of resentment tighten in his gut. "General Rostova, this is Lieutenant Commander Jensen, call sign Reaper. He leads Ares' platoon, our primary direct action element," Maddox said, the introduction sounding like an apology. Rostova turned her pale eyes on Jensen. She didn't offer her hand. She simply looked at him, her gaze analytical, as if she were assessing a piece of equipment. "Lieutenant Commander, I've read your file. Impressive operational record. Your casualty-to-mission ratio is noteworthy." The word noteworthy hung in the air. Could have been a compliment. From her, it sounded like a clinical observation, perhaps even a critique. Jensen's jaw tightened. "We get the job done, ma'am. At a cost," she replied, her tone unchanged. "I've been reviewing your recent mission profiles. Your team favors kinetic solutions. Aggressive, overwhelming force. It's what we're trained for." Slinger Diaz chimed in from behind Jensen, unable to help himself. "We're not diplomats." Rostova's gaze flicked to Diaz for a fraction of a second before returning to Jensen. It was a dismissal so subtle it was almost insulting. "There are other ways to solve problems, petty officer. A sledgehammer isn't always the right tool. Sometimes you need a scalpel. And sometimes," Jensen countered, his voice low and challenging, "you need to knock down the whole damn wall. This isn't a surgical theater, General. It's a knife fight in a phone booth." A flicker of something, amusement, annoyance, crossed her face for an instant, then vanished. "I'm aware of the operational realities, Commander. I am also aware that your last 3 operations have destabilized local tribal relations and created a power vacuum that our primary adversary is now exploiting. Your successes have created larger strategic failures. We will be adjusting our tactical doctrine, effective immediately. I want options that don't involve leveling a city block every time we get a new piece of intel. I expect a full review of your team's TTPs on my desk by 0800 tomorrow." She turned to Colonel Maddox. "Colonel, my office." She walked away without another word, leaving Ares' platoon standing in a cloud of stunned, furious silence. "Adjusting our doctrine?" Ox hissed, his face flushing with anger. "Who the hell does she think she is?" "The librarian," Slinger muttered, the new call sign sticking instantly. "She's going to get us killed with a PowerPoint presentation." Jensen said nothing. He just stared at the empty doorway through which she had disappeared. He had seen her type before. The theorists, the strategists, the ones who saw war as a grand chess match played from a climate-controlled room 1,000 miles away. They didn't understand the smell of cordite, the slick feel of blood, the primal fear that gripped you when the world exploded around you. They didn't understand that out here, the only doctrine that mattered was survival. And this woman, this General Rostova, was going to be the death of them all. He was sure of it. The Deadweight wasn't just irrelevant anymore. She was dangerous. For the next 2 weeks, a Cold War settled over FOB Dagger. General Rostova was a ghost. She was rarely seen outside the TOC or her Spartan office. She demanded endless reports, data streams, and predictive analyses. She questioned every assumption, every piece of received wisdom. Ares' platoon chafed under the new regime. Their training tempo was altered, with a new emphasis on low-visibility operations, intelligence gathering, and non-lethal engagement. Jensen fought her at every turn, his briefings with her becoming tense, almost combative affairs. He would present a plan for a direct action raid, and she would dismantle it with a series of quiet, incisive questions. What is the second-order effect of removing this target? Who fills the void? How does this action serve our long-term strategic goals? To Jensen, they were academic questions. The goal was to kill bad guys. It was that simple. To her, it was a complex ecosystem, and every action had a reaction. The SEAL's contempt for her solidified. The librarian became her unofficial call sign throughout the base. They mocked her quiet demeanor, her clean uniforms, her insistence on strategic oversight. They saw it as weakness, as a fundamental misunderstanding of their world. They were wolves, and she was trying to teach them how to be sheep. The crisis, when it came, arrived not with a bang, but with a crackle of static over a secure channel. It was a whisper from the deep, a panicked message from their most valuable intelligence asset in the region. A local tribal elder codenamed Cassandra. He had information on a pending large-scale attack, but his cover was blown. He was on the run, hunted by a regional warlord's elite kill squad. His last transmission gave a set of coordinates in the Serpent's Tooth, a jagged, unforgiving mountain range that had been a graveyard for foreign soldiers for centuries. The extraction window was less than 6 hours. After that, he would be gone. Ares' platoon is wheels up in 20, Jensen stated in the emergency briefing, already mentally gearing up. Standard smash and grab. We go in hard and fast. 2 birds. Create a perimeter. Pull the asset out. Denied, General Rostova said from her seat at the head of the table. Every eye in the TOC turned to her. She was staring at a holographic map of the Serpent's Tooth, her expression unreadable. Ma'am, Jensen asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Cassandra is the best asset we have. We lose him. We go blind in this entire sector. I am not denying the extraction, Commander. I am denying your plan, she said, her eyes still fixed on the map. The enemy knows we're coming. They know how you operate. The coordinates Cassandra gave you are the cheese in a very obvious trap. Your smash and grab will be a suicide mission. My team can handle it, Jensen shot back, his pride stung. I have no doubt about your team's courage, Rostova said, finally looking up at him. Her gaze was like ice. It's their commander's imagination I'm concerned with. The storm front moving in from the west will ground all air support within 90 minutes. Your 2-bird insertion is a non-starter. The primary valley approach is a natural kill box. The enemy will have heavy machine guns and RPGs on every ridge. You'll be cut to pieces before you even touch the ground. The room was silent. The meteorologists and intel analysts nodded grimly. Her assessment was brutally, terrifyingly accurate. The confidence drained from Jensen's face, replaced by a sullen frustration. His go-to playbook had just been ripped to shreds. So what's your plan, General? He asked, the question dripping with sarcasm. Are we going to send them a strongly worded email? Rostova ignored his tone. She zoomed in on the holographic map, the terrain shifting into stark, three-dimensional relief. We are not going through the front door. We are not even going through the back door. We're going to come up through the floorboards. She pointed to a series of seemingly impassable cliffs and ravines on the southern face of the main massif. The storm will provide cover. A single, low-altitude halo jump here. She indicated a tiny plateau. From there, you'll move on foot through this network of caves. They're old smuggling routes, not on any of our maps. They will bypass the enemy's primary defensive positions and bring you out here, less than 500 meters from Cassandra's suspected location. "Ma'am, with all due respect," the lead intel analyst stammered. "Those caves are unmapped. They could be a death trap. We have no intel on that route." Rostova looked at the analyst. A faint, cold smile touched her lips for the first time since she'd arrived. "I do," she said softly. "I have the intel." She stood up and began to issue a stream of calm, precise orders. She rerouted a Predator drone, not for surveillance of the target, but to monitor weather patterns and enemy movement on the opposite side of the mountain range, creating a diversion. She specified a gear loadout for Ares' platoon that was lighter, faster, emphasizing climbing gear and suppressed weapons over heavy ordnance. She dictated the insertion parameters to the flight crew with a fluency that stunned them. Jensen and his team listened, their skepticism warring with the undeniable logic of her plan. It was audacious, unconventional, and incredibly dangerous. But it was also brilliant. It was a plan born not from a textbook, but from an intimate, almost unnatural understanding of the terrain. As they geared up in the hangar, the mood was tense. They were walking into the unknown, on the orders of a commander they didn't trust. "This is insane," Ox muttered, checking the seals on his oxygen mask. "We're jumping blind into a hurricane on the word of the librarian." "Just keep your head on a swivel," Jensen ordered, his voice grim. "She gets us into this mess, we get ourselves out. No matter what happens, we bring Cassandra home. And we all come home." The flight to the insertion point was a gut-wrenching ride through the leading edge of the storm. The MC-130 combat Talon bucked and shuddered, thrown about by violent crosswinds. Inside the red-lit belly of the beast, Ares' platoon was a study in controlled tension. They were professionals, their fear locked down tight behind years of training. But this was different. They were trusting their lives to a ghost, a set of coordinates on a map provided by a commander who had never earned their respect. The jumpmaster gave the signal. The ramp lowered, revealing a churning hellscape of black clouds and lightning. "Go! Go! Go!" One by one, they plunged into the abyss. The freefall was chaotic, the wind tearing at them, the rain feeling like needles against their skin. Jensen fought to keep his team in sight, their small helmet lights barely visible in the maelstrom. He guided them toward the GPS marker, a tiny pinprick of hope in a world of violent darkness. The ground rushed up to meet them, a formless black mass. They pulled their chutes at the last possible second, the jolt nearly tearing their arms from their sockets. They landed hard on the small, rocky plateau, the wind trying to drag them off the edge. As they quickly gathered their chutes, a lightning strike illuminated the landscape, revealing the entrance to a cave, almost invisible against the rock face. It was exactly where Rostova said it would be. The comms crackled to life in Jensen's ear. It was her voice, clear and calm, piped in from the TOC. "Ares 1, report." "We're on the deck, ma'am," Jensen grunted, his voice tight. "At the designated entrance." "Good. Comms will be spotty in the network. Stay on this channel. I will guide you. Move." They entered the cave, the roar of the storm instantly muted, replaced by the dripping of water and the echo of their own breathing. The air was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and ancient dust. The beam of Jensen's weapon light cut a narrow path through the absolute darkness. The cave system was a labyrinth, a maze of twisting passages and sudden drop-offs. "Take the left fork, 40 meters ahead," Rostova's voice directed, impossibly clear for a moment. "There's a fissure in the floor about halfway down. Hug the right wall." They followed her directions, their initial skepticism slowly being replaced by a grudging sense of awe. Her knowledge was preternatural. She guided them through the maze with unerring accuracy, warning them of loose rocks, hidden pitfalls, and narrow squeezes they never would have seen. It was as if she were walking right beside them, seeing through their eyes. After an hour of tense, claustrophobic movement, they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a small, wooded basin. Below them, nestled amongst the trees, was a small cluster of shepherds' huts. And surrounding the basin, on every strategic ridge and overlook, were the enemy. Dozens of them, They had heavy machine guns, mortars, and spotters with high-powered optics. Rostova had been right. Jensen's original plan would have been a massacre. His team would have been annihilated. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "I count 30 enemy positions," he whispered into his mic. "They have the entire valley locked down." "They are watching the valley," Rostova's voice corrected him. "They are not watching their own backs. Cassandra is in the northernmost hut. There are 4 guards with him. You have a 10-minute window before their next patrol sweeps this ridge. Move silently. No shots unless absolutely necessary." Following her guidance, they moved like specters down the scree slope, using the noise of the wind and rain to cover their descent. They slipped into the camp, wraiths in the stormy darkness. The takedowns were swift, silent, and brutal. A knife here, a garrote there. They reached the hut, stacked on the door, and went in. Inside, Cassandra, a wizened old man with fear in his eyes, was bound to a chair. 4 heavily armed guards were playing cards. They didn't even have time to register the threat before Ares' platoon was on them. The fight was over in seconds. The only sounds the soft thud of bodies hitting the dirt floor. "Asset secured," Jensen transmitted, his heart pounding. "Beginning exfil. Negative, Ares 1. Rostova's voice came back, sharp and urgent. "You've been compromised. A sentry on the eastern ridge saw your entry. They're collapsing on your position." As if on cue, the night erupted. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness, and the heavy chatter of machine gun fire ripped through the thin walls of the hut. Bullets tore through the wood, forcing them to the floor. They were pinned down, trapped. "We're cut off," Diaz yelled over the roar of gunfire. "No way out. Exfil route is compromised. Requesting alternate." Jensen shouted into his mic, his voice strained with the sudden, violent pressure of the ambush. The plan, so perfect up to this point, had shattered. The enemy was closing in, a tightening noose of lead and fury. "Stay put, Ares 1, Rostova's voice commanded, still unervingly calm from the sterile safety of the TOC. "They are trying to flush you out into the open." "We don't have a choice, ma'am," Jensen yelled back, the sounds of hissing ricochets and splintering would punctuating his words. "This hut won't last another minute. We are trapped." The enemy fire was methodical, a curtain of lead designed to keep their heads down while teams moved in to finish them. Mortar rounds began to fall, walking their way closer to the hut with terrifying precision. The explosions shook the very ground, showering them with dirt and debris. Ox was hit, a piece of shrapnel tearing through his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but kept his weapon trained on the doorway. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of Jensen's discipline. "Ma'am, I need a solution now," he demanded. There was a pause on the other end, just a beat of silence that stretched for an eternity. Then Rostova's voice returned, but it was different. The calm, detached tone was gone, replaced by something harder, colder. The voice of a field commander, not a strategist. "There's a dry riverbed 30 meters behind the hut. It runs northwest. It will provide cover for 200 meters before opening into a ravine. That's your escape route." Jensen crawled to the back wall of the hut, peering through a crack in the boards. He could just make out the depression in the earth she was talking about. But between them and it was a 30-meter dash across open, fire-swept ground. "That's a suicide run," he spat into the mic. "They'll cut us to ribbons before we take 5 steps. We don't know what's over that ridge the ravine leads to." The reply came instantly, sharp as a rifle crack, laced with an authority that cut through the chaos in Jensen's rising fear. It was a voice that didn't invite debate. Commanded obedience. "I do, Lieutenant Commander. I walked out of that valley on foot 20 years ago. The call sign was Nix. Now get your men and my asset to that ravine. Move." The name hit the comms channel with the force of a physical impact. Nix. In the TOC, Colonel Maddox, who had been pacing nervously, froze mid-stride. His face went pale. Every operator, analyst, and technician in the room stopped what they were doing. their heads snapping towards the main screen where Rostova's placid face was displayed. The name was a ghost, a legend whispered about in classified after-action reports and smoky bars at Fort Bragg. Nix was a Black Book myth, an operative from the early, deniable ops in this very region. A solo infiltrator who had been presumed dead after their unit was wiped out, only to emerge from the jungle a month later, leaving the entire insurgent network she'd been targeting dismantled in her wake. The official file was a brick of black redactions. No name, no rank, no unit. Just a call sign and a list of impossible achievements. On the ground, in the bullet-riddled hut, the effect was even more profound. Jensen felt a cold shock travel down his spine, colder than the rain soaking his uniform. Slinger Diaz looked over at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ox, gritting his teeth against the pain in his shoulder, just stared. The librarian, the Deadweight, she was Nix. The mockery, the condescension, the 2 weeks of simmering resentment. It all evaporated in an instant, burned away by the revelation. They weren't following the orders of a bureaucrat. They were being guided by a legend. "You heard her," Jensen roared, his voice galvanized with a new, desperate purpose. "Slinger, lay down suppressive fire on the eastern ridge. Ox on me with the asset. We move on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go!" Slinger unleashed a torrent of fire from his saw, the heavy slugs chewing up the enemy position and forcing them to take cover. Jensen and Ox burst from the back of the hut, dragging the terrified Cassandra between them. The rest of the team followed, laying down a disciplined curtain of covering fire. They sprinted across the open ground, the world a blur of muzzle flashes and tracer rounds zipping past their heads. They dove into the dry riverbed, the loose gravel scraping their skin, just as a mortar round obliterated the hut they had just vacated. "We're in the wash," Jensen gasped into his mic, his lungs burning. "Follow it northwest," Nix's voice commanded. "The enemy will anticipate you heading for the low ground. They're wrong. When the riverbed forks, take the high ground to the right. It looks impassable. It's not. There are handholds cut into the rock. Climb." They ran, half-crouched, the rock walls of the riverbed providing precious cover. As she'd predicted, the gully forked. The left path was wide and easy. The right was a steep, treacherous-looking rock face. Without hesitation, Jensen led his team to the right. He reached the rock wall and ran his hand along it, his fingers finding the worn, almost invisible handholds. They were ancient, cut into the stone decades, maybe centuries ago. "Climbing," he reported. They scrambled up the rock face, hauling the asset and the wounded ox with them. It was a brutal, exhausting climb. At the top, they found themselves on a narrow ridge, high above the main fight. Below them, they could see the enemy forces swarming the area where the riverbed opened up, expecting them to emerge into the trap. "They took the bait," Slinger breathed, a note of pure reverence in his voice. "They always do," Nix's voice replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in her tone. "Now be silent. Move along the ridgeline to the west. There is a waterfall 1,000 meters from your position. Behind it is another cave. It will shelter you until the storm passes and we can arrange extraction. I am rerouting the Predator to your location. Its laser designator will be active. If you are engaged, paint the target." They moved along the ridge, shadows in the storm. They could hear the shouts and gunfire of the frustrated enemy below, searching for ghosts. They reached the waterfall, a roaring curtain of white water crashing into a deep pool. Just as she'd said, a dark opening was visible behind the cascade. They slipped through one by one, into the cold, damp sanctuary of the cave. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but they were alive, and they had the asset. Hours later, as the first light of dawn broke through the dissipating storm clouds, the distinctive thump-thump-thump of a Black Hawk helicopter echoed through the mountains. It settled into a hover over the pool at the base of the waterfall, its winch lowering a line. One by one, Ares' platoon and Cassandra were lifted from the jaws of death, plucked from a trap that should have been their tomb. The return flight to FOB Dagger was silent. No one spoke. The usual post-mission adrenaline and backslapping were absent, replaced by a profound, contemplative stillness. They looked at each other, at their wounded brother, at the rescued asset, and they knew. They knew they owed their lives to the woman they had mocked. Jensen stared out the open door of the helicopter, the wind whipping at his face, replaying every moment of the mission in his mind. Her calm, her precision, her impossible knowledge of the terrain. Nix, he felt a deep, burning shame for his arrogance, for his blindness. He had judged a book by its cover, and the book turned out to be a masterclass in warfare written in blood and shadow. When the Black Hawk touched down on the tarmac at FOB Dagger, the ramp lowered to reveal a waiting reception. Colonel Maddox was there along with a team of medics, and standing slightly apart from them, her hands clasped behind her back in that same observant posture, was Brigadier General Eva Rostova. She wore the same clean, pressed fatigues as the first day they'd seen her. The rising sun glinted off the silver streaks in her hair. The team disembarked, helping the medics with ox. They were covered in mud, blood, and grime, their faces etched with exhaustion. They looked like men who had just walked through hell. Jensen, as team leader, was the last one off. He walked stiffly, his body aching, his mind reeling. He stopped directly in front of General Rostova. The entire flight line seemed to hold its breath. The ground crews, the medics, the other soldiers, they all watched, sensing the weight of the moment. Jensen looked at the woman he had called Deadweight, the commander he had dismissed as a liability. He saw the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the only sign that she had been awake all night, living every second of their ordeal with them from 1,000 miles away. He saw the quiet strength that he had mistaken for weakness. He didn't say a word. Words were inadequate. Apologies were meaningless. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his posture ramrod straight. He brought his hand up in a salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of protocol. It was the sharpest, most precise salute of his entire career. It was an act of fealty, a silent admission of his failure and her triumph. It was a gesture of profound, absolute respect. One by one, the rest of Ares' platoon, even Ox on the gurney, followed his lead. They formed a line, a battered, bloodied honor guard, their hands held in salute to their new commander. Rostova looked at them, her pale eyes moving from one man to the next. She held their gaze for a long moment. Then, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a gesture of forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. She returned Jensen's salute with a crisp, economical motion of her own, then dropped her hand. "Get your men to the medics and then to debrief," she said, her voice back to its usual calm, measured tone. "Well done, Ares." She turned and walked away, her stride as even and purposeful as ever, leaving the most elite special operations team in the U.S. military standing at attention on the tarmac, humbled and reborn. The era of the librarian was over. The time of Nyx had begun. Later that night, the FOB had settled into its nocturnal rhythm, a low hum of generators and distant voices. Jensen, cleaned up but still feeling the bone-deep ache of the mission, couldn't rest. He found himself walking aimlessly, his path leading him to the cavernous, dimly lit motor pool. The air inside smelled of grease, metal, and old coffee. He found her in a quiet corner, away from the mechanics working under the harsh glare of floodlights. A single bulb hung over a workbench, casting a pool of yellow light. General Rostova was there, but she wasn't doing paperwork. On a clean cloth lay the disassembled pieces of a rifle. It wasn't a standard-issue M4. It was a Dragunov SVD, the elegant, lethal sniper rifle of their enemies. Her hands, surprisingly nimble and sure, moved with a practiced, fluid economy, cleaning each component with a small brush and oil. The movements were methodical, precise, a form of meditation. It was a weapon from a past life, a relic from the shadows. Jensen stood in the darkness just outside the light for a long moment, just watching her. He saw not a general, but a warrior performing a familiar ritual, finding solace in the cold, clean logic of a machine built for one purpose. The rifle was a part of her, a piece of the Nix legend made real. He had spent the afternoon reading the newly declassified sections of her file that Colonel Maddox had quietly forwarded to him. The black ink was gone, replaced by stark, unbelievable facts. Entire insurgent cells dismantled. High-value targets eliminated with impossible shots. Weeks of survival in the harshest terrain on the planet alone. The file didn't read like a service record. It read like a myth. He stepped into the light. She didn't look up, but her hands stilled for a fraction of a second. She knew he was there. Jensen held out a heavy ceramic mug. "Coffee, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. "Black. No sugar." He had learned that from the file, too. A small detail, but it felt important. An acknowledgement that he saw her now, not just the rank, but the person. She finally looked up, her pale eyes meeting his. She studied his face for a moment, then looked down at the mug. She carefully placed the rifle's bolt carrier on the cloth and took the coffee from him, her fingers brushing his for a brief instant. She wrapped her hands around the warmth of the mug. "Thank you, Commander," she said. It was the first time she had used his title without a hint of challenge or critique in her voice. He didn't apologize for his behavior over the past weeks. An apology would have been an insult, an attempt to cheapen the lesson he had learned. Instead, he just stood there, leaning against the frame of a Humvee, sharing the silence with her. The unspoken understanding passed between them in the quiet hum of the motor pool. He was a SEAL, a warrior who dealt in violence and aggression. She was something else entirely. A ghost, a strategist, a survivor. A scalpel and a sledgehammer all in one. She took a slow sip of the coffee, her eyes on the pieces of the Dragunov. "That was a good plan you submitted this morning, Commander," she said, her voice low. "The one I denied." Jensen was taken aback. "Ma'am." It was tactically sound, aggressive, decisive. She continued, her gaze distant. "It would have worked 99 times out of 100. But our job isn't to play the odds. It's to win when that 1 in 100 scenario becomes reality. It's to see the trap before it's sprung." She picked up the firing pin, holding the tiny piece of steel up to the light. "The most dangerous enemy isn't the one you can see. It's the one you underestimate." The words landed with the weight of truth. He had underestimated her, and it had almost cost him and his men everything. He had been so focused on the enemy in front of him that he had failed to recognize the true force standing behind him. He just nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." She gave him that same small, almost imperceptible nod she had given on the tarmac. She finished her coffee, placed the empty mug on the workbench, and began to reassemble the rifle with the same focused, reverent precision. The pieces clicked together with a satisfying finality. She worked the bolt, the sound sharp and clean in the quiet space. Jensen watched her for another minute, then pushed himself off the Humvee. "Good night, General." "Good night, Reaper," she replied, not looking up. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in her pool of light. He walked back into the darkness of the FOB, but it felt different now. It was no longer a place of uncertainty. It had a center, an anchor. They had a commander. Not a politician, not a bureaucrat, but a quiet, silver-haired ghost who knew how to walk through the valley of death and come out the other side. The Deadweight was carrying them all.